In 1925, a Spaniard, Juan De La Cierva, put the idea of a helicopter back into mainstream development. His invention, a completely new type of aircraft, the Autogiro.
Well, an autogyro has a rotor, and when the aircraft is moving forward through the air, the rotor acts a little bit like a windmill, where the forward motion of the aircraft moving through the air causes it to rotate. And when it rotates, it again is a rotating wing and is producing lift. But the forward motion of the autogyro is produced by a propeller very similar to what you would have on an airplane.
An autogyro, which wasn't really vertical lift on the takeoff, but vertical lift landing, they could auto-rotate down and with very low ground run, plop down right in front of everybody, and especially at air shows, they would demonstrate that capability.
This method of landing is the same basic approach that a modern helicopter would take should its engine fail. Back in the 1920s, Juan De La Cierva proved to the world that to make a safe landing in a helicopter required no engine power and no runway, just a spot big enough for the aircraft. The key to De La Cierva's stable aircraft was his discovery of a phenomenon that only became apparent with rotary-winged aircraft: dissymmetry of lift. De La Cierva had the same annoying problem that many early helicopter designers had. Their craft would tip over before ever leaving the ground. This happened because most rotor blades at the time were rigid. Rotating blades never generate the same force of lift equally throughout their revolution. This causes an imbalance of lift. De La Cierva's solution? He attached hinges to each blade, which allowed them to move fore and aft, and up and down. This would allow the rotor blades to find their own way through the air.
You see, as the forward-going blade goes into the air, it gets a lot more lift and it wants to rise. And as it rotates around and goes with the air, then it wants to sink. And prior to that, then, most of the aircraft would have rolled over. He allowed the blade to flap up, and as it goes around, then to flap down. If it gets too much lift, it flaps up. As it goes around and loses lift because it's going with the wind, it starts to settle. And so this was a self-accommodating sort of thing. So Juan De La Cierva figured that out and was able to build a controllable, flyable autogyro back in the 20s.
Early autogyros had small wings to help steer the aircraft, but these wings disappeared in the early 1930s when cyclic pitch control was developed. This device was based on the problem that De La Cierva had just solved: dissymmetry of lift. The thought was take control of this imbalance of lift and use it to steer the aircraft.
It wasn't until the cyclic pitch, where we can change the pitch as we go around the blade, so it might go high on this side and low on that side, that people began using cyclic pitch to help control this rotor. And so then, in hovering, where you have no forward flight speed, they were able then to tilt the rotor so as to be able to go laterally, or tilt the rotor so as to go longitudinally.
This is the same basic device that steers a modern helicopter. When the cyclic stick is moved, a device at the base of the rotor hub alters the pitch of each rotor blade individually as it goes through its cycle of rotation. So where the pitch in a blade is greater, it grabs more air and the blade rises higher. Where the pitch is less, the blade swings lower because it has less air to catch on its surface. The overall effect with this system is the change in the rotor plane, which enables directional control. Modern helicopters also have collective pitch control. Simply put, this lever changes the pitch of all the rotor blades evenly or collectively. This way, the pilot can lift off vertically, steer the aircraft, and with the cyclic stick compensate for those forces of unequal lift. Thanks to these new technological breakthroughs back in the 1930s, the Autogyro achieved practical success. The Detroit News used one to speed reporters to the scene of major stories. The U.S. Postal Service began test flights for its deliveries. There were even demonstrations held on the White House lawn for President Hoover, who called the Autogyro the greatest achievement in aviation. Harold Pitcairn, who was licensed by De La Cierva to build autogyros in the United States, even foresaw a future where autogyros would make automobiles obsolete. He designed a Pitcairn roadable and demonstrated it on the streets of Washington, D.C. The roadable vehicle was all part of Pitcairn's dream, which he depicted in his promotional material, to have an autogyro in every garage.
Well, Harold Pitcairn built some autogyros here in the United States back in the mid-1930s, which was right in the middle of the Great Depression, and nobody really had money for anything at that time. So, unfortunately, the autogyro, combined with its complexity and high cost, never allowed it to actually be that competitive.
The Autogyro's fate was sealed when in December 1940, its 41-year-old inventor, Juan De La Cierva, was killed in a commuter airplane accident in London. But by solving many of the Autogyro's problems, De La Cierva and his colleagues had opened the way at last for the practical helicopter. The world wouldn't have to wait long. Two men working independently of each other were about to push helicopters into the modern era. On April 22, 1931, Amelia Earhart set a world's altitude record for autogyros at 18,400 feet.